Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week is part 2 of my chat with Frank Burton of the Ragbag Podcast and author of Everything I Am. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, I would strongly recommend going back and listening to it, because it will make part 2 make a lot more sense, and the conversation does continue on quite a lot, so it would make a lot of sense. But if you haven't seen it, then no worries at all. Proceed. Before the chat gets started, I'll give a couple of quick bullet points of what you can expect. Essentially, we continue our chat on sort of generational differences that is explored within Frank's book. We also speak about some of the stigmas that come along with tattoos and also head shaving, funnily enough. Frank's got quite a good story about that. Then we delve into some of the characters within the novel, within Everything I Am, his book, speaking like opinions of certain calibers. We go on a discussion of talking about authors whose characters voice their opinions and Frank's sort of views on that sort of thing. We speak about audience demographics, some challenges that come across of voicing different characters, and then towards the end of the chat we kind of get into a semi-long discussion on social media and Frank's opinions on why he no longer uses it for promoting Ragbag or his books and things like that. So it's a really interesting chat, a lot of cool subjects that we touch on, but that's generally what you can expect. Just before the chat gets fully started, there will be a quick promo for the Room podcast. Now, I've had a guest on my show called Aidan Rosewell. He has the podcast Days of My Life, and he also has the podcast called Room. And after he came on my show and we got talking and things, he asked me to try out and do a little bit of voice work for him, and I'm in the first episode. I'm in the one which is on the 8th of April. The episode is called All Roads Lead to Room, and as I said, our 8th of April, I play one of the characters in that, which it mentions within it, and I had a lot of fun. So, make sure you guys go check that out. There will be a link in the description, and if you haven't already checked them out, I did appear on the Ask Gwyn podcast a little while ago, and I did appear on the Friends in Your Ears podcast as well. So, lots of things to check out. If the normal Genuine Chit-Chat schedule is not enough of hearing my voice, many people probably think it's too much of hearing my voice, but I will leave that to you guys. Anyway, that's enough rambles from me. So, thanks as always for listening, guys. I do really appreciate it. And once this chat with Frank is finished, then I'll be back at the end to give an update of sort of what's going on over the coming weeks, guests, that sort of things, and my Star Wars comics and canon show. So, thanks as always for listening, guys, and I'll talk to you then.
Nobody told me love could hurt like this. Remember the night when we first kissed? Do you?
It can be a struggle to keep positive, given everything that's happened.
And while we were connected, we could forget the darkness.
And in the beauty that I saw when I turned, I forgot myself. I lost myself.
If I don't watch my feet, they may well lift off the ground.
This is quite exciting, really. I feel like I'm at the start of a great adventure.
This is just like some kind of movie.
That we are being looked after, and that we are loved, always.
For more information about Room and how you can support the show, find us on Twitter at RoomPodcast1. Thanks for listening. See you around.
Are you ready to die?
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton.
But there's quite a few things in the book about kind of, intergenerational things, and like the contrast between Frank Jr.'s generation and Frank Sr.'s generation. Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of an interesting thing that just sort of came out. I wasn't really thinking about those particular themes when I was writing it. They just sort of came out, as part of the story. And it's just interesting to kind of dwell on these things in a way. Yeah, just the way that, because a central part of the book is that Frank Sr. and a bunch of his friends have got this secret flat that they are hiding from their wives and partners, and they're renting it. That they each sharing the rent on it, so it's not a lot of money that they're paying into it, so they can hide their financial arrangements from their partners. And but they're not doing anything like sinister there. They're not like cheating on their wives or anything like that. They're just kind of going there to chill out. And it's kind of like a few of them describe it as a place where they can go to be themselves. And it's kind of like sometimes you get the feeling with like my parents' generation where there was a lot of not being allowed to be yourself. Everybody sort of had to be the same as each other.
Yeah, it's interesting because at that era, there's a lot of things there. I want to hear more about this in a sec, but there are a lot of things where, like, nowadays we've got sort of the sway of the opposite way, where everything is so okay. To some degree, it gets a bit ridiculous in certain ways. I'm not talking about transgender or anything. I'm fine with LGBTQ, etc. But like, some people just come out with really ridiculous shit, and then it's just like, oh, but it's their opinion. You're fine to say it. Whereas you go back when, my dad was born in 1949, so. He was born like shortly after the war, so he's quite old and things. And he was telling me when he was growing up and things, it's like, yeah, like linking back with what you said about children. It's like, yeah, me and the guys when we were like 8 years old, just 5 of us grab a tent, go down to like a random bit of woods near just somewhere, and just camp there for the night. Just tell our parents, "Oh, we're going camping," and you're like, okay, bye, see you later. But whereas it's really oddly freeing in that regard, everyone can kind of do what they want and no one cares. But with the social stigmas, obviously, I think in England, I think it was till the 70s, being gay was illegal. And I remember finding that out a few years ago, and I was like, I'm sorry, I knew it was different, but it was illegal to be gay. I was like, what? And that was like, yeah, in the 70s, it became, and I'm like, so hearing of these things, that what you were saying there, aligning it, it's almost, as someone who's so young and clearly naive, I was like, people genuinely weren't allowed to do anything. And my big bugbear at the moment is tattoos of people getting annoyed if I've got tattoos on my arm and things, and people get annoyed by that. But I'm so lucky that now I can even have a job, whereas some people, you had a tattoo in like the 80s or 70s, you wouldn't get a job anywhere. Yeah. So it's weird, these sort of things.
Yeah, it's one of those things that and my parents are really very liberal people, but they do have certain things to do with their age, and one of them is tattoos. They can't stand people with tattoos. My sisters have all got tattoos. And every time my sister said, "I'm going to get another tattoo," well, don't show it to me. I don't want to see it. And I had a phase as a teenager, because it was cool to kind of shave your head when I was in the 90s, and they couldn't stand it. It was the worst. I've never disappointed my parents more than when I shaved my head. They just couldn't stand it. It was like the worst thing. But they were remembering back to the 70s and like racist skinheads and stuff like that. They kind of associated it with kind of that really negative sort of image of like skinheads. Whereas in the 90s, it was just cool to shave your head. It wasn't. I'm not a fascist. I'm just trying to be cool.
Oh, that sounds like some sort of like a name of like a t-shirt slogan for like a comedy film about Nazis, which is a really weird concept. Although Jojo Rabbit is a film about Nazis, it's a comedy film, so maybe. But with the tattoo thing, is that my dad, one of the things some people know when they listen to the show, they know that I have 2 Star Wars tattoos on my arm, and one of them specifically, the first one I got, was a sort of homage to my dad, Darth Vader, and then Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting, the fight that made Anakin into Darth Vader as you know it, combination of the prequels and prequels and original trilogy, Dad's generation, my generation. And I say this to people, but what I don't tell them a lot of the time is that my dad was one of those people who absolutely despised tattoos. Like, my brother got one, and obviously my brother's like 20 years older than me, and my brother got one, and my dad used to remember when I was younger going, "Oh, people who got tattoos, they're the certain kind of people." And I was like, "Yeah, but Rob's got a tattoo." He's like, "Well, that's different." And I'm just like, okay. And when I was that young, I didn't really understand it. And then because Dad's because Dad's passed away, and I want to get something, I I thought, you know what? I'll get this tattoo because I know how much he hated tattoos for basically that sort of reason. I was like, I can commemorate you in my own way, but if you're going to tell me, like, I can't shave my head or have tattoos, I'm going to do exactly what you don't want me to do, just to spite you in, like, an endearing way. And that's the shaving head thing is quite funny of that. It is, even with really liberal parents always, my parents are pretty liberal in the majority of ways, there's just these odd little threads where for some reason they just can't. It's this one thread, and they're like, nope, I hate that thing. So you're okay with all this stuff, and this one thing is what really gets you. So yeah, I hate it, can't stand it. My auntie is the same. Whenever I get a new tattoo, or she's like, I don't know why anyone would get tattoos. It's like, okay, sorry. Sorry to disappoint you.
Yeah, there you go.
Disappointing in-laws and family members and things. But with some of the other things that sort of the things that crop up in the in your book as well, what I want to ask about is, a lot of the things that Frank Sr. says, a lot of them I do agree with, because I think we discussed a bit earlier, he's quite a logical man and that sort of stuff. But, like, did you find a caveat? Other thing is, I've spoken to other friends of mine who are authors, and they've said sometimes in their books they like to have an opinion about something, and so they have a character say an opinion of theirs in that sort of realm. Did you find any of the characters in Everything I Am had that sort of thing, excluding music? Because I know that.
Yeah, but like I kind of have a rule where if I'm putting my own opinion into one of my characters' mouths, I shouldn't be doing that because you quite sometimes you can get away with it, but quite often you can't. And quite often you read a book and there's a character talking and they're saying something, they've got some kind of opinion. Oh, here's what I think about Brexit. You know what I mean? And that's just the fucking author's opinion. You know what I mean? It's not, and therefore you're not a proper character. You know what I mean? You're just like a spokesperson for the author. Whereas I try to come out with things that I don't agree with, or I do agree with it to a point, but the character's taken it too far. So Frank Burton Sr. is a good example of somebody like that, where I agree with a lot of what he says, but he's run away with it way too far. So like he's got all these opinions about. Let's see what's a good example. Actually, I'm just trying to think now.
The promises. He says one thing about keeping a word and promises and stuff. He's like,
So he's kind of like all promises are lies. So everyone who tells you, I promise you that I'm going to do this, they're lying, because they don't know that they will keep that promise. They don't know what's going to happen in the future. They're basically lying to you. And he applies that to every single area of your life. So marriage vows, that's bullshit. You know, and any other kind of promise that you can make, that's just they're just spinning you a line. And Frank Burton Sr. is a salesman, so he uses a lot of he relates a lot of what he says to his job. So this is what I would do if I was trying to sell someone a car. You know, I would tell them this, but I wouldn't mention that. You know, and yeah. So and he's right about a lot of things that he says. He's right about, but he's a bit of an extremist. So I wouldn't say that Frank Burton Sr.'s opinions are my opinions, because they're not. It's just kind of he's taken some ideas that I've had in my head, and he's had his way with them. Whereas if I was to have Frank Burton Sr. sitting there saying, all this Brexit nonsense, I think that, and it's just me giving my opinion about Brexit, and then he wouldn't be as strong a character. He just wouldn't, because people would be reading that and thinking, oh, here's what Frank Burton thinks about Brexit. He's put those words into his character's mouth.
It takes the emotion out a little bit.
Yeah, and you see it a lot. You see it in a lot of books, particularly one. And I really do try to stay away from overtly political subjects for that reason as well, because it would just come across like I'm trying to get a message across, but that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is tell a story. because people can, and just in this book, in Everything I Am, it's like there's certain, like, I don't want to call them issues necessarily, but let's say like there's gay characters in the book, and it's like I'm not writing it in a way that to say that, oh, homophobia is really bad, isn't it? Or like gay people are all right, aren't they? I'm taking the position where I just assume that the person reading the book agrees with me that LGBT people should have the same rights as heterosexual people. Now, the reader may not have that view. The reader may have a different view, but I'm not going to change their mind from writing my book. So I'm not going to preach about it. I'm just going to, here's some gay characters. There you go. You might notice they're just the same as the heterosexual ones. Make of that what you will. There's no message there. I'm not kind of preaching about it. I'm just saying this is real life. This is what these people are. This is the way things are.
That's what I quite like about with Frank Burton's character, Senior, that is that when you say about some of his opinions and things, I remember hearing some of them and going, oh no, I do agree with that. And then he'd continue the train of thought, and then he'd go, oh no, this is much too far. And so you saying that, it is interesting, because I'm sure you've done this just by listening to the book, which is a very weird sentence to say, listening to the book. But some of the opinions that are in that, they're very, very cleverly done in the sense of sometimes, I imagine you do this, just I'll have a thought about, I don't know, as an example, why are traffic lights done this way? And I'm not saying there's a problem with traffic lights. I will just think, I wonder if there's a better way to do traffic lights. And with an example of traffic light, there's not. I wouldn't be able to think of one. But I think of like loads of random little things of just the way things are done. And I kind of look at them and go, I wonder if they were done this way, what would happen? And then I normally get to the conclusion of, oh, there's some huge catastrophic failure that I haven't thought of when this thought first came into my head. That's clearly why escalators don't have a button to go double speed, or these ridiculous thoughts. So I was thinking that it's almost like some of the thoughts in the book are almost in a way like kind of just a thought, but you kind of let it run away. But that runaway thought pattern is actually the thought pattern of someone else, like someone like yourself, as with a fairly balanced opinion on things, who's not trying to push their own agenda. If you, with the promises one as an example, you may agree with it to a degree. Yeah, promises, although for me they're important as honor or something, there is nothing that actually does force anyone to tell a promise. They can say my mum's going to die, and they're not actually going to die. I figured that out like when I was 10. It's not, people know that if you say I swear my mum's life, if you break that, it's not some weird Harry Potter spell that comes out and takes the life of your mum. It's just things people say. So I found that a lot of the stuff had very interesting and balanced opinions. It sounded like almost runaway thought experiments in a sense, but not as much as the 100 was, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah. I'm trying to keep the ragbag world a little bit grounded. Because another one of the rules that I have is that everything has to be plausible, and everything has to be something that could feasibly happen in real life. And even with the more kind of slightly bizarre characters, like the Noddy character, I love Noddy. He's called Noddy because he got that nickname in prison because he was pretending to be mute, and so all you get from him was a nod or a shake of the head. So people called him Noddy because he didn't know his real name, and Frank doesn't know his real name, and he's like a master of disguise, and he comes out and he adopts all of these different personas. And one week he'll be somebody else, he'll be a completely different character, and then he'll turn up on Frank's doorstep. He'll be in a different disguise, and he'll be a different person, and he'll insist on being addressed by a different name, and he's a completely out of this world kind of character, but also it could be true that he could be a real person. There's nothing about him that is not doing magic or anything. He's a real person in the story, but so you can push plausibility to its limits, is what I'm saying. You can go to a certain length. You can go as far as you like with that, as long as it's in some way believable. And it's being running alongside characters who are, by contrast to Noddy, they're quite normal. So because he's hanging around with people who are quite normal, he suddenly seems quite normal as well. That's my theory anyway.
With interacting, I really like it when he's doing one of his disguises, shall we call it, and he's talking to someone, and you've got obviously the characters he interacts with don't know he is Noddy, this air quotes master of disguise, but obviously Frank Burton Jr. does know that. So it is interesting seeing like this perspective of watching someone communicate with someone you know, and they're not who they say they are, and then coming out and then changing and then going to talk to someone else. And it's like this weird, where, as you say, it is plausible. If you're good enough at doing impressions, obviously you did all the voices, so you are good enough to do this sort of thing. Maybe you're secretly Noddy.
Well, the interesting thing about this, and the convenient thing, is that some of the accents that Noddy, because I was doing the audio book myself, so I was doing all these different accents. Now I can do accents sometimes. I can't do all the accents under the sun, and so I set myself this challenge of I deliberately did accents that I could do. So because I created the Uncle Claude character because I can do that accent. So, and it's quite convenient that Uncle Claude is the brother of Frank Burton Sr. So they've even though they have a very different voice, they've got the same accent. They speak at different registers because Uncle Claude's kind of up here, and Frank Burton Sr. Frank Burton Sr.'s down here. You know, he's down here. So it's the same voice but at a different pitch, you know, and so because I can do that accent, that's okay. But Noddy has got so many different accents that I became invested in doing this audiobook and doing all the voices myself. And I was like, oh, okay, shit, how am I going to? Because I can't really do I can't do a Scottish accent very well. But and there's a chapter where Noddy is dressed as a traffic warden called Trevor, who has a Scottish accent. And so I gave it a go. But the thing is, the way that I justified this to myself was that it's a fake accent. That's not his real accent. It's a fake Scottish accent. He's not a Scottish character. He's an English character who's doing a Scottish accent, a fake one. Therefore, my shit Scottish accent.
That's a very good way of putting it, because like I didn't think that your Scottish accent was shit, but obviously listening to it, I wasn't like, this person doesn't sound 100% Scottish, because you go into it knowing that it's someone doing an impression of it. So obviously, if you already know that, then it's not as bad. So that's it's a nice little clever way of getting yourself out of the hole in a sense.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, it's an interesting one. It was that because the last audiobook that I did all the characters with the same voice. I was like, okay, everyone's got the same voice. That's it. They all got my voice. Whereas this one, I was largely because of Uncle Claude, who's got his own voice, because I couldn't just have Uncle Claude's voice, because Uncle Claude's already got an established voice from the podcast. So I had to replicate that. So therefore, everybody else had to have their own voice as well. So, you know.
I liked it. I think in the next book you should. I mean, the 100, if you'd have done voices for everything like that, you'd have got a medal or something, because obviously where not every story is its own thing. Yeah, exactly. You got like one story where it's just one person and they go on this journey and talk to like 12 people in one short story that's only like, 15 pages long. So the chapter itself is only about 6 minutes of actual audio when I'm listening to the audiobook with like 12 different characters. You'd have to have such a ridiculous palette. It would just be implausible. But you've done it really well with the Ragbag ones, though. It's done. So I expect that now from you highly. In the next Ragbag books, you've got to keep up all these crazy accents and stuff.
It's good. And actually, as a matter of fact, I don't know why, but most of the people who listen to the Ragbag podcast are American. And just looking at the stats, that's just the way it's worked out. And I make a big thing of this in the podcast as well. I keep referring to it all the time because it's amazing how often like a British reference will pop into your head, and then you have to be aware of the fact that most of your listeners are American. Then you have to explain it to them what that thing is, and then you can have a lot of fun with that. It's like there's so many different things that so many different bits of British culture that Americans don't know about. And so whenever there's the opportunity whenever something pops up, I'm like, yeah, you don't call it that, do you, Americans? You're saying it wrong. and just sort of make a joke out of it, that they seem to like it, that they're coming back anyway.
Well, yeah, you didn't see, I've got some American listeners. Let's put a few jokes in. Then next week, there's no American listeners anymore. That's a good one. I found with my show, actually, there was, I have quite a high amount of American listeners, but it seems to be dependent on almost the month. Like, I remember I was looking at it. I showed someone, I try not to watch my stats too much because I find that there's a lot of people who, especially in some of the Facebook groups and stuff I think we're in, they just go mental for it. They go, oh my God, I get 1,000 downloads per episode, and in this episode I got 990. What am I doing wrong? Please help me. And you're like, okay, calm the fuck down. Take a step back. I try to I don't really look at the stats much, but I upload an episode once a week. So generally I'll have a glance just to be like, making sure it hasn't gone from like a low standard number to like 1 million overnight. Because if that was the case, I'd be like, oh, but what I found was I was looking at it once and I saw it was mainly UK and stuff. And then the next week or two, it was like disproportionately the US. I think it was like 3/4 America. And I was like, what? And I went to show my mate, who was I think round the following day. And then I showed them and then it swapped back again. Like, as in the just because of the screen, the sort of the snapshot it shows you, it's more so just what's in the last day or two where the highest percentage of people were. And it does seem to flip between them. And then it's just quite funny seeing on the stats occasionally just like one random person in the Philippines or just one off person, in these other places. But it is kind of brilliant that it goes to all these different places. And I have often thought, like, are Americans liking my show because being of my age where the sort of the media is kind of, the English media and American media is kind of clubbing into one almost in a sense. We've still got Downton Abbey and Doctor Who and a few BBC shows, but the media we consume is so much American now. I wonder if maybe that's why there's American listeners, or is it because they really like our accents or what? And I've tried not to spend too much time thinking about it, regardless of how I sound. Like, I've spent hours mulling this over. But I have kind of thought about, like, what do the Americans like about the show? Is it just they like the show, they don't care I'm British? Is it because they like the British weirdness? Do you know what I'm sort of rambling off into nothingness, but do you know what I'm vaguely getting at?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're getting at. Yes, because I've often wondered kind of why I mean, with me, I've got very few listeners in the UK. It's at least 90% American. And there's different, because I kind of play music from all over the world, so I've got quite a lot of different countries as well. I interviewed a musician called Kalika, who's from an Indian background, and he doesn't actually live in India, but he must have a lot of fans there, because I had a huge kind of spike in listeners from India. And the nice thing is they're still with me since a few months ago. So that was good. So I've retained a few of them, and just sort of a lot of random places really. I've got a couple from Iraq, a few from sort of I think I've covered every continent actually. Yeah, I think I've got listeners in each. But it's like America is United States. America is very big. Quite a few Australians, more Australians than British people. Still, Britain is way down. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with the Brits, because I think I've got a very British kind of sense of humour. I thought it would appeal more to British people, but apparently not. It's the way it goes. I'm not complaining about it, because I'm happy with the fact that people are listening. I don't really care where they're from, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not going to post on social media suddenly Frank Burton hates Americans listening to a show. That would be a pretty bad thing on social media.
Yeah, well, I'm off social media now. I've completely ditched the whole thing. It's great.
I want to ask about that. What kind of, was there anything in particular that sort of brought that on, or are you just kind of sick of it?
I've always hated it. Always. I just came to the conclusion that it wasn't doing me any good publicity wise. It just, and I've been proved to be correct. I mean, I came up social media, I don't know, a few months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and the podcast is getting more listeners now than it was when I was on social media.
Oh wow!
There's no benefit to being on there, And I've been thinking about that for a while, that people who were following me on Twitter, a lot of them weren't listening to the podcast. They were just following me on Twitter because they wanted me to follow them back, and things like that. And Facebook, I really didn't get much interaction from that at all. So that was a bit of a lost cause. And Instagram, I got into that a little bit late, and it just wasn't for me. I just didn't like it. So I kind of had an Instagram account for a while, then deleted that. And then I was, and the thing is, it's, social media is quite addictive, you know what I mean? And a lot of people are addicted to it. And I think this is going to be a big thing in years to come, because it's not being addressed properly at the moment. As in not necessarily social media addiction, but smartphone addiction. Because social media is one of the things that will keep you hooked on your phone and keep you sort of locked into what's on your screen rather than interacting what's around you in the outside world. And, for me, I think one of the big reasons for me coming off social media is that I was spending too much time looking at my phone rather than interacting with my kids, and I've got these people right here who I should be interacting with. Rather than doing that, I'm looking at some dickhead on Twitter. I mean, who I've got no interest in and I've never met. And instead of spending time with my kids, I'm spending time with this dickhead. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever for me to be doing that. There's no benefit to me, and there's no benefit to anybody else. It's and I think it's going to be, I think smartphones are the new cigarettes. It's that there was a time when smoking was fine. It wasn't considered a health hazard. Even when, and I think we're at the tipping point now where people are starting to come to a realization that actually smartphones are bad for your mental health. And it's the same process that people went through a few decades back, where smoking was the norm. People would just smoke all over the place. It was part of society. People were just doing it all over the shop. And now, instead of people smoking all over the place, people have got a phone. It's the new. It's the new habit, But I do think I don't want to sound like a fucking old man. You know what I mean? But I do think we're coming to a point in society where people are starting to realise that actually these things are really bad for you. And people are committing suicide because they're spending too much time looking at Instagram and imagining a world in which everybody else is better looking than them. That's just one little example, but it's like there's lots of other things on your phone that are addictive as well. Even if you come off social media, there's still games, there's still things that can suck you in to staring at your phone instead of experiencing the world. And I think that,
Well, it's funny you say. I mean, with you saying you're becoming an old man, it's not at all. I've got a friend of mine, Reese, who's actually been on the show a few times, and he's like 9 days older than me. So unless I consider that being an old man, then which I definitely don't. He's he's my age, millennial, 25, and he's off Facebook completely. He never was on Twitter. He's off Facebook in the same way that you are, which is he's still got a Facebook account purely on the basis that some people contact him through Facebook Messenger, generally because most people use that instead of, it's either that or WhatsApp, which are both owned by Facebook anyway. But he doesn't have a Facebook profile that he is updated ever. He doesn't have Twitter. I think he has Instagram, but I don't think he really uses it at all. He uses Reddit a bit more. But he was talking about it, and some of my other friends have never really been massive into social media, and I found that I would occasionally post on, before the podcast, I would occasionally post on Facebook. I didn't have an Instagram. No, I did have an Instagram, but I would post like once a month or something. And then I would never use Twitter. I had one and didn't do anything with it. And then once I got the podcast, it went from sort of low usage and low interest to now it's high usage, but even lower interest. Like I've said on this show before, and I'm quite upfront. I try and be as honest as I can with my listeners for the most part. But I do say to them normally at the end of my podcast, rarely in the middle, I just say, I really fucking hate social media and I can't stand to promote my podcast on there. And it sounds so good. Like, if you see my social media posts, generally it's, oh, the new episode's out with, I'll do it with this one. Obviously, I'll be like, the new show out with, Frank from Ragbag Podcast. We had a great chat. It was really fun, really enthusiastic. But in reality, I fucking hate posting on social media because I have to just write all these bloody hashtags, I write this description and make it sound like people want to listen. And the thing is that I would come off social media, but the problem is with purely on the basis of the way my show is of having guests is if I don't have a social media presence, getting a guest every single week will become way more difficult because some people won't even go on your show unless you can promote on social media, which is just obviously part and parcel of the air quote industry of podcasting I'm in. But it is that thing of like Facebook is a waste of time because they've put so many bloody algorithms in. You have to pay so much money to do anything. They basically just completely suffocate any chance for anyone to do anything. I mean, there's the guy, the rapper Scroobius Pip, and him and Joe Rogan are basically the reasons I started podcasting. And Scroobius Pip, when Facebook changed the algorithm, he's like one of the biggest YouTubers in the UK, and he was having all his posts have like tens of thousands of views and likes and things. And then within the space of I think it's like 2 or 3 months of Facebook doing this algorithm, it's gone down to like a few hundred. And he's like one of the biggest podcasters in the whole of the UK, and he's getting like no one can see his posts on Facebook. I think he checked it and he was like, he did this little vague experiment. He was like, everyone who can see this, even if you don't care about my show, can you just like this post just so I can have a vague gauge of how many people are actually seeing this post? And he posted afterwards, and I think it was something ridiculous, like 2%. And obviously not everyone's going to specifically like the post anyway, but he was saying that the disproportionate amount of effort you have to put in, and often Facebook now is always asking about money and boosting posts and things. Instagram are owned by Facebook now, so they're going to slowly start doing it, and their algorithms start doing it. And then Twitter is so inundated with everyone who doesn't really care what you're saying. And what you said really resonated with a lot of the people on Twitter follow you, and they're only following you because they want you to follow them. And I found that quite a lot of podcasts where there's quite a lot of podcasts that if they follow me on Twitter or Instagram, my general rule is I'll follow them back because it's the done thing to do. But none of my numbers haven't really changed much. And I know most of these podcasts have never listened to mine, and honestly, I haven't listened to a lot of their podcasts. But it is to get to that point where I kind of look at podcasts now, and if they've got 100,000 followers, well, I go, well, how many people are you following? Oh, 100,000. Well, what's the difference if I take your followers away from the following? What's the numbers? 100. So that's really probably the amount of people actually care. Like 100, and that's kind of what mine's a little bit like. Like my general listenership is almost. See what I'm saying? So I agree with you. I completely do, and I really hate I hate posting on social media, and it's always a chore when I try and do it. And I've thought about it on the odd occasion, being like, "Oh, should I just get rid of Facebook? Should I?" But I'm thinking,
I recommend it, man. It'll save you time, and you can use that time because the thing is, I was spending a lot of time on trying to come up with like things to say on social media. I was spending ages doing it, absolutely ages. And it was it's a complete waste of time because I'm not getting any new subscribers from it. All I'm doing is maybe interacting with people who follow me on social media but don't necessarily listen to my podcast and aren't necessarily definitely aren't interested in reading my books. You know what I mean? Because I think particularly in the book world, I think promoting a book on Twitter is just you might as well just jump off a cliff, man. It's there is no way someone is going to read one of my tweets about my book and go, some guy's tweeted about his book. Yeah, I'll buy that and read it. It's not going to happen. That's not the way to do it. It's just and so many writers and authors and comic book writers, illustrators, and all these people are on Twitter all the time, just trying to promote their books and stuff like that. And it's like, why are you doing that? You could be doing much more productive things. You could be writing for a start. That would be much better than doing what you're doing right now. You could be writing right now. You'd be writing another book. And you could be promoting the book in other ways. And actually, the way to promote a book is to kind of interact directly with people. which is what I'm doing now. I'm talking to you about a book and to your listeners about the book, which is good because I'm interacting directly with people. If I was, I've done things in the past where I've kind of been out and done kind of readings, to audiences and kind of met up with like book groups and enthusiasts and things like that. Actually going physically to meet people. That is the way to promote the book, because they will buy a copy off you. I will take a stack of copies with me and they will buy a copy off me and say, can you sign it for me? And I'll sign it for them and I'll write their name in the book, and it'll be a really nice little personal thing for them and a nice little interaction for both of us. That is what writers should be doing to promote their books, getting out there and talking to people about it.
I agree with you. And the podcasting world is kind of different because podcasts are online. It's an online thing. You can and it's free of charge. So there have been people. I'm not sacking it off completely, because there have been people who have clicked on a link that I've put on a tweet or a Facebook post and gone, oh, I really like that. I discovered you through Twitter. That was nice, wasn't it? And that is nice. It's good that they discovered me through Twitter. It's nice. But, on balance, it is not worth my time. It's not worth the hours that I spent. And I literally spent hours each week doing social media shit. And but very little return. Such a little return. Particularly with books. I mean, with the podcast, it was okay. With books, you like I say, you might as well just go and jump off a bridge, because there's no that you with a t-shirt on with the book on it, and then that'll get more publicity.
If I walked around if I walked around in the physical realm with a t-shirt with a picture of my book on, that's good, because I'm interacting with people.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely an interesting thing. I mean, because it is with that sort of the social media and the facelessness of it, but with the in real life and the book and that sort of interaction, it will mean more to people. And then even if it's almost like you can still get it through secondhand social media in a sense, because if you're going out there and you meet these people and you're getting a face and they'll be like, oh, I really like this book, I'm going to tell other people about it, and then they'll, in theory, kind of do that work anyway. That's what I kind of say to my listeners normally at the end of the show. I would go, I don't spend any money on advertising. I'm not going to waste too much time on it. But if you like the show, tell other people. And, if people really enjoy it, they will tell other people, and eventually it can kind of wrap up and do it. But
yeah, that is the good thing about social media. The good thing about social media is for people like yourself and myself who have got things that they want to promote. The good thing is, if somebody likes it, they will put it on social media. And people who if one of my friends, I mean, I'm not on Facebook anymore, but if I was on Facebook, one of my friends posted something and said, "Oh, I've discovered this new book, or I've discovered this new podcast, or whatever, and I think it's really good," I would definitely check it out, because it's a friend who's recommended it to me. And that is a good thing. That is, but it's a secondary thing. I don't need to be on social media for people to be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of those things where I think it's interesting. I think what you were saying before, where you mentioned it, sort of comparing it to smoking and that sort of the way people view it. I think it is going that way, and I think that nowadays what's slowly starting to happen is, obviously, for a while it was people wanted stuff, and they wanted this stuff, that stuff. They don't really care necessarily on the quality. Obviously, there was, for a very long time, it was, everything is almost like a meme before memes were a thing, of like, everything is made in China, just everything, because it's cheap, blah, blah, blah. Whereas now what's happening is, because you can go on Amazon or eBay or whatever, and you can, type in, oh, I need new headphones, or I need new aux cable for my car. Oh, how much is it? 25p from China with free delivery. It won't get here for 3 weeks, but it's better than going to HMV or whatever. And it's like, that kind of idea is now, it's peaked, I find, and now personal and handmade things are making a comeback, in a sense, where so many more people now, I think there's been so many resurgence of, there's like these hipster cafes and places where you just go and it's just loads of chairs that don't match with a couple of handmade tables, and then there's 5 things on the menu. The 5 things are amazing, but that's it. And it's like, I think now what's quite nice is due to as a symptom of this oversaturation of everything, the things that are actually really cool are now getting a bit more light. And I wonder if as the internet evolves, however it's going to, if things are kind of going to go up and down like that, where it's like people are really into social media and then everyone's going to realize it's really bad for you and everyone's going to go off social media, and then the new next level of social media is going to come in, and it's going to be this kind of weird sort of cycle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's.
I hope it doesn't,
well,
but it might.
It's difficult to predict what is going to happen, but I can't see things carrying on the way that there are in their current form. You know, just a hunch that I have, but there's so much sort of toxicity. I can't say the word out loud. Toxicness. I know that's not the word, but I can't say the real word. On Twitter in particular, but other social media platforms are going that way as well. And I think there's going to be a turning point where people just turn their backs on it and go for something else, because people are going to realize that it's not healthy for them to be doing that. And at some point that is going to happen and things are going to change. But I don't know whether they're going to change for the better or the worse. I mean, they might change for the worse.
Potentially.
You know.
Fingers crossed.
Because a lot of the things that you see on social media, and it's part of the social media addiction, is that people get kind of addicted to outrage, you know, and things like the big thing that really wound me up about using it, because I hated Twitter the most, but I used it the most. So figure that one out. You know what I mean? But just the one thing that I just couldn't get my head round it is that people kept retweeting things that Donald Trump had said, and that you're just retweeting Donald Trump, even though you're adding a comment saying, "Look at this dickhead," and or words to that effect. Sometimes it was a bit more eloquent than that, but it's the same thing. You're just retweeting things that Donald Trump has said, and you're just kind of, you're helping him out, mate. You know what I mean? And I just couldn't get my head around it. There's so many people doing it as well, and I just had to block them all. Because you can mute words as well. I muted Trump and Brexit and all that sort of thing, and still there were things that were creeping through all the time. It's just look, somebody said something else now. Some guy said something else. Look at this guy. Oh, I haven't muted him, so I've got to see what he's got to say. You know, and I've got to mute him as well. You know, and I think people are addicted to that. They're addicted to the outrage behind it, and the right wing are just as guilty as that as the left wing are. But you know, I tend to associate it with left wing people because that's kind of my bag. But you know, they wind me up as well. That's the
yeah, I'm in a similar.
That's why I try not to get involved in politics. It's just people arguing for no reason.
No, I completely agree with you there. I'd say it's getting kind of later now, so we're going down the rabbit hole for social media. We've been on it for quite a while, and I think
yes.
Well, it's probably worth us easing off on that sort of now. So I'd say as it's getting quite late, it's obviously, fortunately, we're both in the same time zone. When normally I have a guest who's in America or something, and they're like, it's the middle of the day for them, and me, I'm like, oh, it's getting quite late. I'm getting a bit tired now. So we'll wrap things up in a moment. But it's been absolutely great talking to you, and I really, really loved the book, and I can't wait to read the others. But before we wrap up, is there any sort of final words you want to say? I'll include links to all your stuff below, but any final words and etc. before we sort of close out?
Yeah, I think what have I not said already? Just all the things that I've already said. I'll repeat those to you now. There you go.
Wonderful.
But do please check out my website, frankburton.co.uk. I have a video series on there which I'm very pleased with, which is part of the Ragbag universe also. It's called the Ragbag Rambler. And it's me wandering around the streets of various different cities of the world but I'm not really doing it in real life. I'm doing it on Google Street View. So it's me commenting on things that I've seen on Google Street View as Frank Burton, the character, who is who's a bit of a character, shall we say. So, I'm very pleased with that. And it's available. YouTube is another thing that I've come off. So the only place that you can see the Ragbag Rambo video series is frankburton.co.uk.
I'll make sure I include a link to that. And obviously, we've been talking about your book, and it's on. Obviously, your book is on Bandcamp. It's also, they can do Name Your Price if they want the audiobook on that, or they can find it in sort of the 5 parts on the Ragbag Podcast. But also, they can buy it on Amazon and the other sort of bookstores and things. And yeah, I mean, I'll make sure that I. In the intro and outro, I'll sort of echo these things, and I'll include links in the description. But yeah, I mean, it's always great chatting with you, Frank, and keep writing because I love them. If only for me, just keep on doing it. I'm sure there are many other people who love it as well. But yeah, I really recommend anyone listening who wants something quite cool to get your teeth into is check out the Everything I Am, and also check out 100 because I think that's cracking as well. But well, as I say, Frank, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you and to catch up again. And when you release your next book, you have to come back on.
Oh, I definitely will. Yes.
Absolutely stellar. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.
And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Coming up next week is probably going to be my chat with Megan. Any non-regular listeners, Megan is my girlfriend, who I also live with. I've had a chat with her a couple months ago, I think it was, when there was like a gap in recording schedule, so I had her on as a filler, but it was still a really good chat. And this week, what's going to be is we're going to talk a little bit about sort of isolation. We're not going to delve too deep into sort of COVID and that sort of thing. But Megan's been really, really getting into Animal Crossing recently, so probably talk about that a little bit. She's been getting into video games generally a bit more and things like that. So that'll kind of be the topic because she's never really been that into video games, but I have been playing video games. I think I got a Game Boy Color when I was about 5. So, talking about that sort of thing, talking about what we've been doing while in isolation, what some of the things maybe some other couples could do if you're struggling to find things to do, that sort of general stuff. Just kind of, there's no specific thing that we've got written down. It's just a kind of, chatty podcast thing with no subject matter, just kind of vague bullet points in a sense. And then after that, I'm recording another episode with the all-powerful Tony Farina. Tony has been on an episode previously where we spoke about online education and that sort of thing. And if anyone checks out my other show called Star Wars Comics in Canon on the feed of Comics in Motion, Tony does have a show on there as well. It's called Indie Comics Spotlight. So I really recommend people go check that out. And then the subsequent weeks from there, I'm basically going to be getting on people who've either been on the show before or are a part of that sort of Comics in Motion group, because it's a lot easier to get these interviews organised in this current climate. All of these guys are really reliable, and I've had them on before, and I don't have as many stored in the bank. So and a lot of the time now, there's a lot less people listening to podcasts, and what I don't really want to do is have a couple of the people on who I've been speaking with and have them on like an amazing chat, and then a lot of people miss it, not because they're trying to avoid the show or anything, but myself as an example, I'm barely listening to podcasts at the moment. I primarily listen to podcasts on my commute to work. It takes me about an hour or so to get there and back, so I have like 2+ hours a day of commuting, which I listen to podcasts in. Where I'm just with Megan, and I'm not going out really, except on a run, which I only need a bit of music for 10, 20 minutes. So I'm not really listening to podcasts as much. So I thought that it's quite unlikely I'm going to be getting a lot of new listeners, and it's more likely that a lot of you guys who listen every week are going to be involved. So I thought it's kind of better if I have people who are reliable, who are going to be more fun conversations. Not that my conversations aren't always fun, but sometimes I do have guests that are a bit more serious and ones that are a bit more, it's quite hard to get the conversation going, or that it's quite specific and it's bullet pointed almost to the T, and it's exactly what they want to speak about and things, which a lot of the time is fine because that's the conversation I want to have. But in this current climate and things, I'd rather be focusing on chats that are not only easy for me as an interviewer, but also fun for me to be involved in and for you guys to listen to. Just some chats that have a point to them, but are having a laugh and chatting about this, that, and the other and stuff. So I've got a few lined up. I've got one lined up with Scott of the 20th Century Geek podcast and Chris of Comics in Motion. We're going to talk about wrestling because I have never really had an interest in wrestling. I barely know anything about it. I've played the SmackDown vs. Raw games a bit, but apart from that, I'm not really into it. They are really into it and have recently launched a podcast. So going to talk about wrestling and that sort of stuff because, I'm always intrigued by things that I'm not involved in or don't have that much knowledge on. Wrestling is one of them. Also going to have a chat with Dave and I think Max Byrne is of the Mandatory Marvel and DC Comics podcast on Comics in Motion, and Dave is the other half of the powerhouse of Comics in Motion. So I've got those ones lined up and a few other sort of twists and things there within that, and I'm going to speak to some other people to get them on the show again, but that's kind of what you can expect from Genuine Chit-Chat going forward. If any of you are really clamouring for a podcast or someone who's completely new and something completely different things, please let me know. I'll try and track someone down, find something, and have at least one podcast within the mix that is different and informative and that sort of thing that isn't specifically about coronavirus. But you know, if no one's that fast and ever, all you guys are really happy with it, then that's kind of what's going to be going on for the next few weeks, if not a few months, of just more chats that are fun with awesome people and other creators. So if you listen to my show or this one and you really like it and you're still trying to find other podcasts to listen to, over the coming weeks, it's going to be people who all have their own podcasts. So you're going to be able to sort of branch out and find more things to listen to. So that's basically what you can expect. Also echoing what I said in the intro, I am on the first episode of season 2 of the Room podcast. It's just called Room. And I'll include links in the description, which I think I've already done. And yeah, the first episode, it was released on April 8th. You should be able to recognise my voice within that. I've done some other work for Aidan as well, but I won't go into those details until it's been confirmed when it's going to get released and stuff. So I've also been on the Ask Wim podcast recently, as well as the Friends in Your Ears podcast. So links to those in the description as well. Be sure to go check those guys out and give those podcasts love. And that's more or less it for me, guys, except, as I've said, kind of touched on earlier, I have a podcast called Star Wars Comics in Canon. It comes out once a week, every Saturday, on the podcast feed of Comics in Motion. I've done episodes on, it's kind of Star Warsy things, but through the comic book lens. So if you're not really interested in the comics of Star Wars, or rather you don't really want to have to spend time or money reading them, I kind of do overviews of some of the series, some of the key points in it. I had a bit more trivia and facts and stuff. One of the ones I did recently, or as in yesterday, was the Captain Phasma run of comics. Explains what she did between episodes 7 and 8, like how she got out of the garbage chute that Finn and Han put her in, and how she didn't get found out of putting the shields down and those sort of things. And I also give a little bit of information about General Hux's history with Phasma, as well as a bit more detail about Starkiller Base, because a lot of people didn't realise it's actually Ilum, and Ilum is where Jedi used to get their lightsaber crystals from. So nerdy Star Warsy things. If you want a bit more Star Wars knowledge, but you don't want to listen to, an hour-long thing of people, talking about one scene in it or anything like that, all of the Star Wars Comics in Canon episodes are between 10 and 15 minutes long. They're quite easy to listen to. I try and keep them quite concise and things, and I include links to, I include descriptions and information about the comics and things if you did want to get your hands on them, and I do kind of link it to some of the books as well. So that's my show that is on the Comics in Motion podcast. That's out every Saturday. Obviously, Genuine Chit-Chat is out every Sunday. So lots to listen to, as well as the Ask Win, Room, and Friends in Your Ears. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. I appreciate you listening, especially to the end when I just ramble on about nothing. And yeah, I hope you guys all stay safe. I want you to know that me and Megan are completely fine in lockdown and stuff. Everything on our end is fine. No one we know has got ill or anything, thank God. So everything on our end is all fine. So thanks for anyone who's been concerned about us. So yeah, stay indoors, stay safe, but try and stay sane as well, because that's a big one. I love each and every one of you, especially for listening to the end, and I'll talk to you all next week.